this session of the Open Book Festival. On the stage, we are delighted to have Tuvalu, Russell Cupido, next to him Fatima Dike, Phillip Voegt, and Friederike Bubenzer. And I am Bettina Wyngaard. I will be facilitating this session. The books that we will be talking about, these are the things that sit with us. Please, afterwards, if you don't have a copy already, please go buy. Thank you. Friederike, we'll start with you. You were part of the editorial team. When one looks at this book, it doesn't look like an academic text, and that is actually what it is. Can you tell us a little bit about the project behind this book? The one that led to this book.
Thanks, Tina. Apologies in advance for my voice, which is partially gone, but has returned after 5 days, when it's entirely gone. It's interesting you say that it's an academic book. A friend of mine said it's a pity that it's this shape because it looks like a coffee table book and people don't read coffee table books.
And look at the pictures.
Yeah. I would say it's not an academic book, but it is a book that was born out of an academic project. A project that was led by Professor Fatima Dike, who's one of the editors, who was leading a project on the intergenerational transmission of trauma in South Africa, one of the first studies of its kind. And as part of this study, which the organization that I work for, the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, was invited to do the work for this study because we have relationships in communities across the Western Cape, and because we thought it would be a nice way to sort of build a research project on community interventions, community dialogue, which we've been doing for the last 20 years. We then conducted the research in Woensdag, in Langa.
And those are the three main sites?
Those are the 3 sites, the only 3 sites. And we chose those quite deliberately as sites in which events had happened, particular events had happened in the apartheid era, and where we could speak to a particular audience of individuals who had experienced those events, and roughly the book is sort of structured into 3 sections. But what was then quite important was that the academic content that was collected in order to be academically analysed at the University of Stellenbosch, where Pumla's unit is housed, that we would then take this data back to the community. And this is something that IGR believes in, it's something that Pumla and her team believe in. And so Mariki Olofsson, my wonderful co-editor, who's sitting right there.
Mariki, do you want to stand up so people can see you?
Hey, Mariki.
Mariki and I started the journey of working through all of the 60 stories that we had collected from people like myself, Fatima, and Phillip, who are sitting here. And it was a difficult journey for many reasons that I won't go into now, but in the process of working through those stories, we realized that these were stories that had to get out into the public domain, that these were stories that we felt our nieces and nephews, my nephew in January, would need to read, that my white friends who so often ask me, why are we not moving on, need to read. Stories that Black South Africans who still say that my story doesn't count, my story hasn't been heard, that those stories are documented and held on. And of course, this is a very small contribution. We have billions of people and millions of stories. And Philip's story, for instance, who's in this book, is 500 words of a 30-page transcript. The same goes for Fatima and Russell and the other 3 people in this book. So we took snippets, we took tiny bits of their larger experiences. And the idea was to create something public that people could engage with to understand why and how the past continues to disrupt the present as it does.
You spoke about 60 people in the beginning, but only 29 stories in this book. Who were the other groups? Or explain to us the generations, because you talk in the book about the generations, different generations.
I think we found quite soon that studying the intergenerational transmission of trauma is something that is a lot harder than we had anticipated. And Kate, who's actually also in the audience, conducted focus groups in all 3 of the communities with the 2nd generation. So the first generation of individuals were people who had themselves lived through apartheid, who were
So these 3?
Well, exactly, yeah. And the 2nd generation would have technically been their children. I think what was quite hard to do is to draw very clear lines and draw analyses to say, well, if the parent experienced this, then of course this is trauma if the child is experiencing that. And I think that's part of an ongoing complex study, which the Pumla's unit at the university is continuing to analyse. I've lost my train of thought. Which is
while you're catching that, let me ask you the next question. You keep talking about Pumla's unit, and your unit.
Yes.
Those are the two main partners. So just tell us who they are.
Right, sorry. So Phillip Voegt is a professor. He's the research chair of the unit in historical trauma and transformation at Stellenbosch University, and this is the research unit that has been set up at the university to academically look into manifestations of trauma, experiences of memory, and to draw these all together at the university and in the university context. I work for an NGO, we work with people in communities, we partner with universities, we try to collaborate as much as possible. We feel very strongly that research must inform the work that we do in an organisation, and that the work that we do, the stories that we hear from the Russells, the Fatimas and the Phillips must then be fed back to universities. So it's a yin and yang process, and I think this book exemplifies that.
Okay. Last question before I go to the rest. You keep talking about the NGO you're working for. What's the name?
It's the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. Betty, my director, isn't here. He'd be pleased.
We need to know who people are. The next question is for the three of you. Obviously, there was an interview process. Could each of you just shortly tell us about how you experienced the interview process? Or tell us what the process was that you went through when IJR and Pumla's unit, the trauma, historical trauma unit came to you. And anyone can start. Fatima, you start.
You always look at the person that's coming to you for your story and where they are coming from. And I found Mariki, who was the first person that I was in contact with, to be genuinely interested to know. And so I was able to open up.
And please just check Friederike is sort of showing you where in the book they are. Okay, Russell?
I'm from Woensdag, and Woensdag has an organization called the Woensdag Open Reconciliation Process, a group of volunteers working to establish good relations between groups. And we were asked by IGR to partner with them in this particular thing, and I volunteered that I would be one of the subjects to be interviewed, and so that's how the process started. Also, just what impressed me is the place where we met. Marieke and her husband came, Friederike came, and there was another lady that actually interviewed, I can't remember her name, Harry's is a new surname. And it was, I saw it as an opportunity to actually speak about some stuff. The Woensdag Open Reconciliation process started out of a bomb blast that happened on the 24th of December 96. And that traumatized our town quite a lot. So a lot of the people involved with this were victims of this bomb blast directly, or spectators. I stood literally just outside the building. I walked past the building when it went off. So,
but that's not what your story is.
No, my story is not about that at all. My story is about that.
And we'll get to your story later.
Yeah.
Okay. Phillip?
Yeah, okay, I was approached in, I think it was 2016. We were called by one of the local community workers, and we met at Pontival Library. And a date was set up for a first interview. I can recall it was Miss Abrams that interviewed. That was about a 2-hour interview that we had, and a follow-up was with Friederike. And then we went another process where we had to shorten the interview.
Sorry to interrupt you. So the first interview was just to get the information, and the second one was to refine it.
Yeah, to amend or whatever. see through, because I think the recording wasn't well taken up by Mrs. Abrams, or Miss Abrams. So, so then that was the second one where Friederike came in, that we amended some things in the interview, and then the follow-up was the final one. We had also the launch of the book. That was to me something very exciting because the community members were.
Yeah. Fatima and Russell, did you also have 2-3 interviews?
Yes, several. Yeah. And then the photographs were taken from different spaces. Like some were taken from my home, and then I took them to Cupido Arts and Culture Center, where the picture in the book was taken, sitting in the backyard. It's a very beautiful space.
Yeah. And it's beautiful pictures, all of it.
Yes.
It actually looks more like a Cupido book. Yeah. So,
Please read it anyway.
Yes, please do read. Next question to you. In the introduction that was drafted by you, Pumla, and Maliki as the co-editors, there's emphasis placed on the role of the TRC. Do you consider this book to be a continuation of a conversation in the TRC process? Or where would you place this book in relation to the TRC? And also, there might be people who don't know who the TRC is, so if you could just speak about that too.
Thanks. If I can just quickly also say that I remembered my question earlier on, which I think is quite important. How did we get from 60 interviews to 29?
Yeah.
We couldn't use all 60. It would have been too much. And so we had to select. And what we wanted to do is to sort of create a picture of the South African story. We knew what the key events were in South Africa's history, of course. We needed stories to illustrate those. And we tried as best possible to sort of weave them into what ended up being this sort of tapestry, which is not complete, but at least it has the texture and the nuances of the country in it. Many people decided not to participate once they'd been invited. Some people saw their story, had taken their photos, and decided at the last minute they didn't want to participate. So it was a journey and a very consultative one. It was a very personal story. We tried very hard to make this a different research project where we built relationships with people. We felt it was important. I remember Phillip and I sitting for hours recounting his family history and making sure that we got it all right, and there's many others.
And sorry to interrupt you. The stories in this book are just the first generation group.
Almost, but not exclusively. We had difficulties getting white people on board this project, and they were not our priority audience either. But we did feel it was important to include a few stories, and so the Toy family sort of came on the last moment. And I think that's a separate conversation. We've had some interesting commentary on whether or not those stories belong. I personally feel they do belong, but it's another section. On the topic of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was a 2.5-year process which ran in the late 90s, was started by Nelson Mandela in order to begin the process of rectifying and restoring the immense injustices of South Africa's past. Yes, this is a continuation of that process. That commission could only do so much. It could only, in that very, very short period of time, hear 22,000 testimonies. When we actually had, at the time, the population was around 45 million. We had 45 million stories to tell. And we never did. And the work I do in communities today, we work in schools, we work in businesses, we work in communities. Wherever we go, I hear people say, it has been so good to tell my story and to feel heard. We create spaces for that. And so I'd like to conclude from that there's a desperate, desperate need for us to come together and share stories, for white South Africans to listen, for black South Africans and coloured South Africans to speak, and for stories to be heard, to be acknowledged, to be internalized. And so I would like this to be a tiny effort in lieu of that. I'd like to very much work with the Ministry of Education to get this onto the Western Cape history curriculum, and that's my next priority next month, because the stories are in English, Afrikaans, and Zulu. So it sort of lends itself. It's sort of like we've actually produced a history book for teachers. So,
Just Thank you. And that is for the education department thing, I'm assuming? Yeah. So please, all of you, if you know someone at the education department, let them know. The TRC dealt with people who had experienced physical violence, mainly. The focus of this book was on people who did not experience physical violence, am I correct?
No, not entirely. There are many stories in the book of people who, there's Tony to Pepper, there's a photograph in here of the 17 bird bullets that he has in his head up until today. And I don't think everybody necessarily felt the need to share that. I think, and I feel inadequate to speak about this. I think everybody chose what they experienced, and I think the psychological can be so incredibly physical.
You're absolutely right. Phillip, I want to ask you the next question. The event that you describe in this book happened when you were 10 years old. But obviously, only one event is described, but it's had an effect on the rest of your life, I'm assuming. Can you talk a little bit about this? About what your story is and how it affected you?
Yeah. But just by coming into town every time, it's almost like it's a reminder of the past, what happened in the past. We took N1 and we came over past the Cupido Center. And then I said to my son-in-law, this is the very place I grew up. I was born in Clarendon Street, a few meters from there. And the pain, the painful experience, I attended the school in the rural estate as we go to the parliament. It was called the School of Industry. It was four of my brothers. We were four that attended the school. The very particular, what hurt me the most was I was so bitter when that incident happened. I was, as a young boy, we were about 9 children at that point in time. And I was elected to run at the athletics event at Greenpoint, the old Greenpoint track. And that very same day, without me knowing, very early my father woke us up. I just saw a lorry pull in at number 6 off Albert Street. And we had to put the furniture, and I thought, what's happening here? I need to go. And that particular day, we only were informed on the morning that we need to move to Bonteel. That in itself, I was confused, I was angry, and I grew up with that bitterness and anger in my life. I even at the stage, I was a teenager already, and this thing, it was right at the back of my mind. And sorry to say, I hated white people. It seems as when I saw a white person, my blood went over my head. And it was difficult for me to go through that. I grappled with this thing about how do I get rid of this? And it was I'm sure it was a painful process for my parents as well. My mom visited me yesterday, and when I see my mom, I look back at many years with the hurt that was caused. However, I said when at the lawns, I said, I'm so glad I could overcome that the day I accepted the Lord in my life. And the Lord changed my life and took away the bitterness. There's still this thing when you enter in here, you have flashbacks, However, I had to forgive. I said at the book and I said this word. You know what struck me the most about Nelson Mandela was the words that when he was interviewed by Larry King on the Larry King live show, And Larry King asked Mr. Mandela, so Mr. Mandela, you were incarcerated for 27 years. Are you still angry? You know what was the response of the great man? I don't have time to be angry. So I could identify with my story in that, but it was a painful, it was a very painful journey for me. I'm now a senior, I'm 66 years, going on to 67, but I can identify how even younger generations, even how it affected my brothers and sisters. And they don't talk, but the more you talk about your story, the more you get healing. And I think that is exactly what Friederike said earlier. Whilst you tell your story, and there's many stories out there, you know, we are in a community where we are congested, and that brings about what we have today in our society, a very unemployed side, and even this thing about dysfunctional families, where there's no father figures, it's as a result of apartheid.
And I think each of you, and I'll speak to both of you about your stories now, it's obviously all painful stories, brought back painful memories, I'm assuming. You had trauma counsellors available to the participants and also to the researchers. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, Pamela being a psychologist and us being aware that the material that the researchers would be collecting and the stories that we would be asking people to account would be very difficult. We had to bring somebody on board. I mean, I think in terms of any kind of ethical research, it's a necessity. Interestingly, it was taken up by only one of the researchers. In retrospect, I also thought we should have extended it to the translators who sit line by line, recounting, translating, going back, checking again. You know, these stories have an impact on so many people. And yeah, so it sort of without thinking, without any further consideration, it was something we had to do.
Yeah. And it makes absolute sense, because when I read through the stories, I was upset, and that was just reading it afterwards. Having to live through it must have been hell. Fatima, your story deals with an event that happened when you were already removed from the apartheid situation. Could you talk to us about that?
Rejection.
And the prison of the mind.
Exactly. You see, I'm a playwright by profession, and I was born into theatre during the period of protest theatre. And I was the first black woman to work at the Space Theatre right from the beginning. And while we were being involved in fighting racism in South Africa, we were like completely unaware of what was happening underneath. And the whole situation of being constantly being rejected. I am in a theatre situation where the majority of people are white. They are my friends, and from time to time we want to go out and have a drink together. And it would be a game for us. We would play this game where let's all go in and see what happens. And 9 out of 10 times, my white friends will be allowed to go in. And I would be told very politely by a young white man or whoever was at the door of the restaurant, sorry, we don't serve blacks. And it's this constant rejection that hits you all the time, you know. You're intelligent, you know, you're successful, you speak their language perfectly, you understand everything, you're in theatre, but the rejection. And so in 1980, I was invited to an international playwright conference in Iowa, in the US. And I stayed there for 3 months, and then later on I moved to New York because most of my friends lived in New York and they were in exile and they were all asking me to come. You have no idea of that community of people who are in exile. When you come, even if you've been in New York for 2 years, if one person has not met you, when they meet you, they smell you, you know, like they want to smell South Africa from, you know, your body physically. You just have no idea. So I ended up living in Manhattan on 4th and 2nd. I was introduced to Ellen Stewart, who owned a theater off Broadway. And she was going to do my play Glass House, which was the last play I wrote before I left South Africa, which was based on the first child who was murdered in front of my eyes during the student uprising at Langa High School. So we did Glass House at her theater, and she invited me to come and live with her. And there was a bar across the road. It was a place just called the Bar, and we used to hang out there, made a few friends, we'd play pool, drink beer, and of course when they heard that I'm from South Africa, they immediately went and got Hugo Sikela's music into the jukebox. So it was quite like home, you know, in a sense. So one Monday, my friend said, okay, listen, we won't be coming on Tuesday to meet at the bar. And so I didn't know what to do with myself. So I went to the bar and I said, you know, I feel like I would like to eat something. It was around this time, and somebody recommended a restaurant on 5th Street. Funny enough, I found the restaurant. I'm standing on the pavement across the road from the restaurant, and I'm looking at this building, this restaurant, and suddenly a thought enters my mind. What if they don't serve blacks? I'm in New York, I forgot. What if they don't serve blacks? And suddenly this urge, this anger, you know, just rose up in me. And I said to myself, if they reject me today, I am going to kill somebody. I will not leave that restaurant without strangling one white person in that restaurant.
And before that thought entered your mind, you probably didn't even realize.
I wasn't aware where I was, but it was that whole thing where unknowingly you have actually imbibed rejection into your being. So every time when you're going to enter a space that is white, the first thought is rejection. You know that someone is going to tell you, go away. So, and it was happening to me quite often. Even the person who helped me to become a playwright, who was a white guy, and wanted to teach me to do research. And he took me to the South African library in the gardens. We were fighting. I was fighting with him. I refused to go with him to the South African library because I knew the moment we entered that door, they would tell me and let him in. And the funniest thing was that he opened that door and he was holding onto my hand tightly and we were in this fight. And as soon as the door opened, you know when you see a dog that's been run over by a car, you know, it's got that snarl, like a frozen smile. That's what happened to me and him. We opened that door and entered the South African library and my hand turned into this smile. and this man pulls me straight to the counter and says in a very theatrical way, can you please give my friend a membership card? And the membership card just came up with no problems. And I said to myself, it's only because he's white and he asked for it. And he came inside, sat with me, and taught me how to do research. And of course, he warned me, don't take anything out of this place. So I stood outside this restaurant in 1980 in Manhattan, and I had made up my mind. If they reject me, today I'm going to kill somebody. And so I walked into the restaurant. And I remember very clearly, in 1980, there was a drought in New York. And the mayor had told the restaurant owners not to put water, on the tables, but to wait for people to ask for water. But when I walked into this restaurant, I sat down and I waited for the insult. And it never came. Instead, a young man, my son's age, walked up to me, very respectfully greeted me, gave me the menu, gave me a glass of water, and told me to take my time. And when I'm done, he'll be standing right at the back and I can call him. And at that moment, when that man treated me, that young boy, that young white boy, treated me like a human being, I hated South Africa. And I told myself, I will never come back.
And then,
Yeah, I was going to join the underground movement.
did talking about the story, did that help you in you?
Yes, it helps to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm getting tears in my eyes now just listening to you.
Well, one of the things that helped us to overcome the rejection was that we were also doing something called beating the system. So in other words, you would do something before the government came, stopped you or arrested you, because we were playwrights.
Yeah.
So we would make it a point that you would write the play and get it through and put it on stage before the censor board came,
Yeah.
before they banned it, before they arrested you. So you were always living on this tense, cycle of always being there before the system, before the police arrived. And that kind of like took your mind away from the rejection itself. But now I was in a space where there was no rejection.
But you were still waiting.
It was in my subconscious.
Russell, your story also deals with a situation where I'm assuming, maybe I should just check with you, I'm assuming the story you referred to happened after apartheid, not during apartheid.
After.
And still, attitudes were as if people were still living in apartheid. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, after school I left Woensdag for quite some time. Lived in Gauteng and a few other places. I also spent some time overseas. And when I came back to Woensdag, I joined a so-called charismatic church. And the talk is everybody's accepted and color is not an issue. In fact, I actually got elected into the eldership of that particular congregation as a young man, single, which was also kind of strange, but nonetheless I made it into that position. And then, as it happened, a young Afrikaans girl started liking me and really pulled all the stops out in terms of charming me, and eventually I sort of reluctantly in the beginning okay, let's go out and let's chat and this and that and other. And one thing led to another, and we sort of stuck up a relationship.
I'm always interested in this one thing led to another.
No, just really, we spend a lot of time together. I love socializing, I really do. And so, I talk to people, and I talk to people, I'm sort of introverted, but I'm also an extrovert, and I really like to build relationships. Life for me is about relationships. And so, eventually I had to sort of stop myself and say, okay, now you're in this situation, how is the town going to accept it? I knew it was not going to fly. And then I started talking to her, and I knew that her family will not. Family came from a prominent wine growing family. One of the sellers in Woensdag carries the name, so you can start doing some countdowns. At any rate, some of the mountains around us carries that name. so they obviously couldn't deal with it.
Because you were poor.
Maybe I didn't like wine. I actually love red wine right now. But at any rate, so one day came around. She lived in a flat with 3 other girls and whatever, white girls. I started visiting her at the flat. That didn't go. That wasn't really bad. So we really struck up. And then one day she said to me, "Listen, I would like to introduce you to my family." She's met my family by now. I would like you to introduce her to my family. So, funny enough, they just live around the corner where I live now. They used to live, and I went there. Man, oh man, it was the explosion that happened was massive. Except no words were spoken, cold handshake, quiet. She got pulled into a room, spoke about.
While you were there?
While I was there, yes. Turned around and obviously just said, we go. So we left. And we carried on in spite of that. At one point we started about getting married, and she started talking about getting married, and I said, yes, it sounds like a really good idea. Let's explore how this can work. And then in this particular fellowship I was at the time, now I made this public. This time it wasn't a silent explosion. This was pretty harsh. People were telling you, are you trying to prove a political point? Are you trying to do this? In fact, this particular person flew from Victoria. I spent quite a lot of time in Victoria before that, so from an organization in Victoria, and I knew the person that came. And he pulled me aside after this eldership meeting and asked me, now listen, please, now we need to sit and deal with this issue because this cannot happen. And yeah, so it really became pretty rough. What was difficult for me is in terms of the teachings of the Bible. There's a passage in the New Testament that says literally, there is no Greek, no slave, no free man, no female, no male, but everybody is accepted. And to me, it's still the crux of everything in life. Everybody must be accepted, regardless of all sorts of things. So, and I had a very big difficulty, even still to today, that people cannot accept that very basic scripture. And if you go a little prior to that in Acts, where Peter got this, what is it called? A cauldron full of, so-called unclean animals. It says, that's it, you can have it.
Are you talking about the vision?
The vision that he had, yeah. You can go ahead, you can slaughter, you can eat. It's really not a problem. And it's still a very big difficulty for me, because when I sit and walk into a place like this, I look at people and I look at people's face. Like today, we didn't have an opportunity to talk, but we end up talking. It's still, she talks about rejection. To me, it was a rejection of who I was, number one, as a person, because I was made out to be lesser. This lady was, I still see her today as a terrified person that really needed to be.
Yeah.
She really needed to be. She was absolutely genuine in love for me. And, but it was just like, wow, I really still couldn't understand it. And the process of the book and talking about it actually brought a lot of healing to me. Obviously, before publishing, I spoke to my wife, Michelle, that couldn't be here tonight. She's not well. And at any rate, so she also happens to be white. Southern suburbs go from here.
So you've got a cup.
Maybe you're right, I don't know. But at any rate, no, but at any rate, the amazing thing is that we sat down and we talked about this particular thing. Would you have a problem if we publish it in the book? This, that, and the other, read it through. She came back to me and she says, no, it must be heard. People must understand that this particular attitude, the legislation that obviously went with it, all of these things were evil, and it must be understood and heard by people. In fact, the past Friday, my friend Eddie that sits there at the back, he had a workshop about storytelling where he wanted to start a process in power. And I went to Boschendal. And amazingly, when I drove into the estate, I had to wait for a while before they let us into the venue. I sat there and I just had this really serious, profound sense of loss. And you sit there and I think, now, am I jealous because these guys are lovely wine sellers and also? No, it wasn't that. It was just to say that our history whoever went before us, it's not heard, it's not recorded. It's as literally as the saying says, it's like if we weren't here. Woensdag is a similar thing. We're coming up to the 200-year bicentennial next year in February, and one person, a guy called Dr. Titus, you might know him, at an event that he says, guys, you know, the town was founded in 1820 by legislation of the British, but what happened? What happened here before? People lived here. People, you know, had families did. So that to me was the big thing, and I think much of what this book has done is actually made me face the past, my personal past, and also the country's past. I'm not at the point where I wanted to leave, although I left at one point. I actually literally sold up everything, put it in a backpack, and I left. I went to live on the Cupido because it was the easiest place to get into as a South African. And when FW de Klerk got elected, I thought to myself, maybe we have a little hope, let's go back. And I still have that hope today. That this is such an amazing place with amazing people. And because of our attitudes, we don't get to meet each other. We don't get to know each other. And my dream, maybe a little bit like this, but this dream is that we need to see this rainbow nation come out. But more so, I really, that's just, for me, every person's humanity must be recognized. I don't want anybody to live like this lady, I won't call her name, but the fear, the motivatie and the fear that she had to live with, the stigma, in fact, that she still has in town. Because she was brave enough to step across. The frustration and also some of the rejection that I experienced. And eventually I left that particular fellowship because I felt basically just, if you preach one thing, you need to follow through. If it's not the truth, then what is it? So yeah, it was traumatic. But yeah, and it was, from my point of view, it was never to make any statement about anything. It was literally just a person that I loved and a person that I wanted to spend my life with. And I dare say, I was denied the opportunity because the rest of us didn't actually want to allow for something like that.
And each of these stories talk about rejection in some form. Friederike, why was it important to use stories as the methodology? Why didn't you use something else?
That's a beautiful question. I don't think we have anything else but stories that connects us and unites us as human beings. It's the simplest, oldest, most powerful methodology. I've been in bed for the last 4 days. My mother's been at my bedside telling me stories. And I imagine, around the world, that's the same. I'll tell those stories to my children. I read these stories and it made me feel connected. It made me understand. I'm not sure what else we could have done. We could have maybe just done photographs. And we want to still do that. I think there's power in using the photographs sort of in an installation art way, maybe even here, because it's a nice venue. But for me, stories are the obvious vehicle to bring us together.
Because through stories, each of us allow the other person to enter our being in a different sense, in a way that a purely academic project, research project, documented might have done. I'm sure that there are people in the audience with questions. We still have 10 minutes left. Are there any questions? Are you all still? Yes. Sorry, do we have mics for the audience? Are you here? Sorry, I'm pointing at you.
I wonder, obviously we love that people can tell their stories now, and we love to hear that some people have moved on and got involved with different feelings and background. But my fear and the question is, why we forgive and why we move on? Would it be better if we held on to grace because then we will not forget? Because if we forgive and forget, then the one the stories to tell, and we draw it to some amnesia or something. What do you think?
Okay, is the question directed to anyone in particular?
Probably to the storytellers.
I take a leap here. Forgiveness is definitely not about forgetting. You remember every day that something has happened or somebody has done something bad to you, but you choose, and it's a choice that you make to forgive that person. I think people take a cheap shot when they say forgive and forget. There's some sayings around it: if you make the same mistake twice, it becomes a pattern. You gotta remember. And I think one of the challenges, one of the insights that I have gained in time is I don't know the evil that is offended me, like in this case. And we don't know the evil that apartheid was, okay? I tend to sometimes say it is because it's still very much where I live, it's still very much alive. If we don't know that evil, and we just put it away, then we forget about it, and we make the same mistake, and we need to not make the same mistake.
What made Nelson Mandela the greatest? I wouldn't even call him a politician, I call him a statesman. What made Nelson Mandela the person that he became? Because he could forgive. And I know that every human being's dream is to live in a peaceful world. As long as you carry the hatred for what people have done to you, we are still enslaved by them. We come from a culture of Ubuntu. And the word Ubuntu comes from the word Ubuntu, which means a human being. And then Ubuntu means being human. And in the African culture, Africans have two ways of describing human behavior. We are either a human or we are an animal. So, for me personally, I don't hate anybody. What happened, happened. That's their problem, it's not mine. I want to be an example of a human being, of Ubuntu in South Africa. Because if I become an example that is positive, I know that many people will want to become like me. We cannot perpetuate the hatred that has divided South Africa for all this time. And South Africa is still a divided country because all of us have imbibed the teachings of apartheid unknowingly.
Yeah. So, speaking on forgiveness, I work at Cupido Correctional Center for Correctional Services as a spiritual worker there. But let me say the following. There is a prison that no man can see. It holds no bars, no walls, no gates, but it's inside of a person. Inside of us, one spirit. And that prison is called unforgiveness. What is meant by unforgiveness is you will still be in the emotional chains that Christ came to break if you don't forgive. So I say, in the light of that, you can be held captive in a prison state of unforgiveness. So in the whole context of apartheid era, we must remember that we were institutionalized by the rules of the then government. You were told where to sit, where to go, when to do something, where to sit. In this Cape Town Gardens, you couldn't sit on any bench other than non-European. You couldn't walk free. There was a curfew. When you walked in Pinelands, the white people, then they asked you, why are you still here 9 o'clock? You need to have a permit to either work overtime or you are here to do something. I can recall at Langa Station, the big Ngomo trucks. They used to pull up there. And if you don't have your dom pass, the guy would walk straight to the van because he knows you don't have a dom pass. That was the thing it was hurtful, it was painful. I mean, the more you tell your story, the more you get delivered from that. And I think one of the things with storytelling is that you find freedom in that, you find forgiveness. You come over that hurdle. It's difficult. I recall pre-94, just before the elections, I went up to Gauteng, Johannesburg then, but it was the Northwest Province, and we worked there. I did a contract there for a couple of months with my younger brother. And we went into a town and I went for a haircut. I stepped into the hair salon and there was one person sitting there and one cutting hair and I wanted the haircut. And I was turned away. I was told, no, we are fully booked. Whilst there was only one person sitting. That was hurtful. But we had to overcome these hurdles. I can truly say today I have forgiven. I had to go to white people and ask for forgiveness. I hated you. Because we cannot hide anything from God. We can hide from people, but we cannot hide from God. So my story is and storytelling is one of the where you let go. Forgive and let go. You let go. Although there's still flashbacks you get from time to time, but I can truly say, today I can look white people in their eyes and say, I love you with the love of the Lord.
Thank you. Our time is up, unfortunately. If you still have any questions for any of the panel, then you're welcome to approach them afterwards. And I've been told that I need to read this out. So, thanks to the Open Books headline sponsor, Leopard Lead Wines. A reminder to support the Open Books School Library project. Am I doing it in the right voice? Books and vouchers are available for purchase at the Book Lounge, satellite shop in the Homecoming Centre. And please, you all need to go buy this and read it. It is astounding. It is incredible. I'll get you now. Will the authors be available for signing? You'll be there. And
I only just sign when people have read the book.
so you need to read the book. Sorry, last one?
I just want to say that you've all spoken about how the healing power of the stories. I just want to commend you on your courage, because each time you tell your story, it still hurts. And for the courage to actually hurt again so that you can heal. I'm just so amazed, and I thank you.
Yeah. And from my side, thank you to the panel, each of you. I know some of you came from far. I agree with you. Thank you for the courage you displayed in telling your story in this book and coming here tonight. Friederike and Mariki and the others, thank you very much for putting this together. Thank you. Have a good evening.